Rachel Doyle was standing in a hospital finance office, arguing about a billing error, when a stranger's typo turned her whole life into a lie. "Eleanor Vance," the clerk said, squinting at his screen. "That's what the system's got." Rachel almost laughed. "My mother's name is Doyle. It's always been Doyle." She had no way of knowing that in 11 days, that one wrong-sounding name would blow up her company, her family, and her closest friendship, all in the same week. She had no idea that the woman she trusted more than anyone on earth had been sitting across from her for 9 years, holding a secret so heavy it should have bent the table between them. But that Tuesday morning, Rachel Doyle didn't know any of that yet. She just thought Gary the billing clerk had made a mistake. Rachel was 41, sharp-jawed, the kind of woman who wore blazers even on Saturdays because she said you never know when a client will call. She'd built Doyle and Vance Consulting from nothing, 11 years of 18-hour days, client dinners she couldn't afford, a 2-bedroom apartment that doubled as an office when the lease on the real one fell through. She remembered typing invoices at 2 a.m. with a space heater aimed at her feet because she couldn't justify turning up the thermostat. She had no husband, no kids, and exactly one person she trusted completely, her business partner of 9 years, Melissa Vance. Melissa was warm where Rachel was clipped. The one who remembered everyone's birthday, who brought soup when someone was sick, who cried at other people's weddings. Clients loved her. Employees loved her. Rachel loved her too, in the strange, guarded way she loved very few things. She'd once told her therapist, half joking, "Melissa's the closest thing I have to a sister." She had no idea how close that joke actually was. Rachel was at St. Agnes Medical Center that morning for her mother, not herself. Eleanor Doyle had suffered a stroke 3 weeks earlier, and Rachel had spent every lunch break since then untangling insurance forms and billing codes that seemed designed by someone who hated the English language. Gary, the tired-looking clerk, was pulling up records to correct a duplicate charge. "Sorry, this is going to take a second. Your mother's file has some old entries from a name change." "Eleanor Doyle, formerly Eleanor, hang on." He turned the monitor slightly. "Eleanor Vance?" "That's a mistake," Rachel said. "My mom's never been a Vance in her life." Gary shrugged, unbothered, the way people are unbothered by things that don't apply to them. "System says otherwise. There's a name change record from 1984. Vance to Doyle." Rachel stared at the screen the way you stare at a word you've read 100 times until it stops looking like a word at all. Eleanor Vance. It had to be a clerical error. Some other Eleanor, some database glitch. Her mother's date of birth was right there next to it, though. Her mother's social security number. The maiden name field, blank, like it had been overwritten on purpose. She didn't sleep that night. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself a lot of things that night that turned out to be lies she needed in order to function. 3 days later, she asked her mother directly. Eleanor was still weak from the stroke, propped up in a hospital bed with a blanket that smelled like industrial detergent. When Rachel said the word Vance, her mother's face did something Rachel had never seen it do before. It closed. Like a door being pulled shut from the inside. "Where did you hear that name?" Eleanor said. Not a question. An accusation dressed up as one. "Mom. The hospital records. Were you ever married to someone named Vance? Before Dad?" Eleanor's good hand gripped the blanket. "That was a long time ago, Rachel. It doesn't matter anymore." "It matters to me." "Was there a marriage? A child?" Silence. The machines beeped. Somewhere down the hall, a cartwheel squeaked against linoleum. "I need you to leave it alone," Eleanor finally said, and her voice cracked in a way that told Rachel this wasn't stubbornness. This was fear. Rachel left the hospital that night and sat in her car in the parking garage for 40 minutes without turning the key. She thought about the name Vance. She thought about Melissa Vance, asleep right now probably, 3 miles away, in the apartment they'd celebrated together the day the business finally turned a profit. She told herself Vance wasn't an uncommon name. She almost believed it, right up until she got home, opened her laptop, and pulled up the original partnership paperwork from 9 years ago. Rachel had barely glanced at Melissa's full legal name back then. Why would she? It was buried on page 4 of a contract neither of them read closely, because they'd been too busy celebrating. Melissa Eleanor Vance. Rachel read her business partner's middle name 11 times before she accepted it wasn't a typo. Her phone buzzed. A text from Melissa, sent at 11:47 p.m., the way she always texted late because she said her best ideas came after midnight. Hey, can we grab coffee before the Hendricks meeting tomorrow? Need to tell you something. Should have told you a long time ago. Rachel stared at the message until the screen dimmed and went black on its own. The coffee shop was called Birchwood, 3 blocks from the office, the kind of place with exposed brick and overpriced oat milk lattes where Rachel and Melissa had celebrated every contract win for the last 9 years. Rachel got there 20 minutes early. She never got anywhere early. She sat in the corner booth with her hands wrapped around a cup she didn't drink, watching the door like it owed her money. Melissa walked in at 8:58, 2 minutes before their scheduled time, wearing the green coat Rachel had teased her about 100 times. You look like a Christmas ornament, Vance, and for 1 second, seeing that familiar coat, that familiar tired smile, Rachel almost let herself believe none of it was real. That she'd imagined the whole thing. That her mother's face closing like a door was just an old woman confused by medication. Then Melissa sat down, folded her hands on the table, and said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything. Rachel's stomach dropped through the floor. Okay, she said. Melissa took a breath like she'd rehearsed this 1,000 times and still didn't have it right. My mother, my birth mother, gave me up when I was 2 days old. Closed adoption. I found out when I was 17, going through my parents' filing cabinet looking for my birth certificate for a passport application. There was a second document in there. A relinquishment form. Melissa. Let me finish. Melissa's hands were shaking now, and Rachel realized this was the first time in 9 years she had ever seen Melissa Vance's hands shake. The name on that form was Eleanor Doyle. I didn't know if she'd remarried, changed her name, moved states, died. I didn't know anything except a name. So I looked. For years, on and off, I looked. Rachel felt the room tilt. And then, Melissa said, her voice dropping to almost nothing, 9 years ago, I answered a job posting for a business analyst at a 2-person startup being run out of an apartment on Delancey Street. I didn't know whose company it was until the interview. Until you said your mother's name was Eleanor. The coffee cup in Rachel's hand rattled against the saucer. You knew, Rachel said. Her voice came out flatter than she meant it to, flat the way ice is flat right before it cracks. You've known this whole time. 9 years. You knew you were, what, exactly? Say the word, Melissa. Your sister, Melissa said. Half-sister. Say mother. The word landed in the space between them like something dropped from a great height. You knew, Rachel repeated, and you didn't say anything. Not when we signed the partnership papers. Not when I gave you 40% of the company. Not once, in 9 years, at every birthday, every holiday, every single dinner where you sat across from me pretending. I wasn't pretending to be your friend, Rachel. I am your friend. You lied. For 9 years. That's not friendship, that's a con. Rachel's voice cracked on the word, and she hated that it cracked, hated that her body was betraying the fury she wanted to feel with something that felt dangerously close to grief. I was scared, Melissa said, and now she was crying, the kind of crying that didn't care about mascara or coffee shop strangers glancing over. I found you, Rachel. Do you understand that? I spent 17 years being the girl nobody wanted enough to keep, and then I found the one person who shared blood with me, and she was smart, and funny, and building something incredible, and I thought, if I tell her the truth right away, she'll think I only wanted the company. She'll think I only wanted her money. I wanted to earn my place first. I wanted you to love me as Melissa before you had to decide whether to love me as family. That wasn't your decision to make for me. I know. Melissa wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing a line of mascara toward her ear. I know, Rachel. I've rewritten this conversation in my head about 400 times, and I never land on a version where I don't sound like a liar. Because I am a liar. I lied by omission every single day for 9 years. But I need you to know, the day you told me your mother had a stroke, 3 weeks ago? That's when I knew I couldn't keep doing this anymore. I've been trying to work up the nerve to tell you ever since. Rachel stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor loud enough that 2 people at the next table turned to look. I need to think, she said. I can't be here right now. Rachel, please. Don't. Rachel's voice broke completely on that single word. Don't follow me. Don't call me. I need to think. She walked out of Birchwood into a gray March morning, and she did not look back to see if Melissa was crying harder, because she already knew the answer, and knowing it made everything so much worse. What Rachel didn't know yet, what she wouldn't find out for another 6 days, was that her mother had known Melissa's name for exactly as long as Melissa had known Rachel's. And Eleanor Doyle had a reason for her silence far more devastating than fear of losing a friendship. She had a reason rooted in a promise made to a dying man, 28 years earlier, in a hospital room not unlike the one she was lying in now. Rachel didn't go back to the office that day. She didn't answer Melissa's calls, 5 of them by noon, then nothing after that, which somehow felt worse than the calls themselves. She drove without a destination for almost 2 hours, ending up, without entirely meaning to, in the parking lot of St. Agnes Medical Center. Her mother was sitting up in bed when Rachel walked in, color better than it had been in weeks, a crossword puzzle abandoned on the tray table. You look terrible, Eleanor said, which was as close as her mother ever came to saying I'm worried about you. I talked to Melissa, Rachel said. She didn't sit down. She told me everything, Mom. The adoption. The relinquishment form with your name on it. She's your daughter. She's been my sister for 9 years and you had to have known, at some point, that the woman I built my company with was the baby you gave up. Eleanor's face went the color of the hospital blanket. I didn't know, she whispered. Not at first. Not for years. You talked about your business partner constantly, Rachel, but you never once said her full name to me. Melissa Vance. Just Melissa. I had no reason to connect. When did you find out? Eleanor's hands twisted the edge of the blanket. 14 months ago. You brought her to Sunday dinner. Introduced her as Melissa. And she shook my hand, and she said, "It's so nice to finally meet you, Mrs. Doyle," and there was something in her eyes, Rachel, something searching, something that made the hair on my arms stand up. I asked her, later, in the kitchen, alone, if her middle name was Eleanor. She went white. She said yes. And I knew. 14 months. Rachel's voice was shaking now, both of them shaking, mother and daughter, in a hospital room that suddenly felt very small. You've known for 14 months, and you let me keep working beside her every single day without telling me? She begged me not to say anything. She said she needed time to figure out how to tell you herself, that it wasn't my story to tell first. And Rachel, Eleanor's voice cracked, and for the first time in the entire conversation, tears filled her eyes. I let her have that time because I owed her. I owed her more than 14 months of silence. I owed her 28 years. What does that mean? Eleanor closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she looked older than Rachel had ever seen her look, older than the stroke, older than the hospital gown, older than anything. I was 22, Eleanor said. I was engaged to a man named Thomas Vance. We were going to get married that spring. And then I found out I was pregnant, and everything changed overnight, because Thomas got sick very suddenly. Aggressive cancer. He was gone in 4 months, Rachel. 4 months from diagnosis to the funeral, and I was 7 months pregnant standing at his graveside in a coat that didn't button anymore. Rachel sat down slowly in the chair beside the bed. She had never heard any of this. Not one word. My parents were devout, unforgiving people, Eleanor continued. An unmarried, pregnant 22-year-old was a scandal they couldn't survive in our town. They arranged everything before the baby was even born, a closed adoption, a clean break, a story I was supposed to tell for the rest of my life about a trip to visit a sick aunt. I held her for 6 hours in that hospital, Rachel. 6 hours. I named her Melissa before I signed the papers, even though I knew whatever family took her would probably change it. I don't know why I did that. I think some part of me needed her to leave with something that was mine. Mom. I met your father 2 years later. I changed my name, I moved states, I built a whole life on top of that hospital room, and I told myself the kindest thing I could do for that baby was to never come looking, never disrupt whatever good family had raised her. I told myself that for 28 years. Eleanor's voice broke completely. And then she walked into my kitchen 14 months ago and called me Mrs. Doyle, and I realized the good family I'd imagined for her. I had no idea if it had even existed. I never asked. I never knew if she'd had a happy childhood, or if she'd spent her whole life feeling exactly the way I feared she would. Unwanted. Rachel sat frozen, every ounce of anger she'd been carrying since Birchwood curdling into something far more complicated, grief for a woman she'd never met properly, grief for the mother in front of her who'd carried this alone for 3 decades, grief for the sister who'd apparently spent 17 years believing she'd been thrown away. She thinks you didn't want her, Rachel said quietly. I know. Eleanor was crying openly now. And I don't know how to tell her that isn't true without sounding like exactly the kind of woman who says that after the fact to feel better about herself. Rachel's phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from an unknown number, sent 30 seconds ago. This is Melissa's sister, her adoptive sister, Katie. She asked me to text you if she didn't hear from either of you by 3 today. She's at Lakeview Memorial. She collapsed at her apartment an hour ago. They're saying it's stress-related, but her heart rate won't stabilize. She's asking for you, Rachel. Please come. Rachel stood up so fast the chair toppled backward, and for one terrible, silent second, she and her mother stared at each other, 2 women who had just discovered, in the same afternoon, that the same secret had been slowly breaking 3 lives at once. Lakeview Memorial was a 20-minute drive that Rachel made in 12, running 2 yellow lights she'd normally have stopped for without thinking twice. Her mother, against every doctor's recommendation, had insisted on discharging herself against medical advice to come along, sitting in the passenger seat with an 4 bruise still purple on the back of her hand, gripping the door handle every time Rachel took a turn too fast. You shouldn't even be out of bed, Rachel said. I'm not letting either of my daughters go through this without me in the room, Eleanor said, and it was the first time she'd said the word daughters, plural, out loud, and something about hearing it cracked something open in Rachel's chest that she didn't have time to examine. They found Katie, a stranger to Rachel, mid-30s, exhausted, wearing scrubs from her own job that she clearly hadn't had time to change out of, pacing the ER waiting room. They think it was a panic attack that triggered an arrhythmia, Katie said, before Rachel had even finished introducing herself. She has a heart condition, mild, usually controlled. But her cortisol's been through the roof for weeks, she hasn't been sleeping, she barely eats, she's been carrying this secret for over a year like it was going to kill her, and I think it almost just did. Can we see her? She's asking for you specifically. Both of you. Katie looked at Eleanor with an expression Rachel couldn't quite read, something between curiosity and old, complicated grief. I've heard about you my whole life, Mrs. Doyle. Melissa used to ask our parents about you when she was a kid. They never had answers. I think that hurt her more than anything else, not the not knowing you, but the not knowing why. Eleanor flinched like she'd been struck. They found Melissa in a curtain bay, hooked to a monitor that beeped steadily now, her face pale against the pillow but her eyes alert, tracking the door the second it opened. Rachel, she said, and her voice cracked, I thought you weren't going to come. I almost didn't. Rachel pulled a chair beside the bed, and after a long moment, took Melissa's hand, the hand with the 4 taped into it, careful, the way you'd hold something you were afraid to break. But then I found out you might die before I got the chance to be furious at you properly, and that seemed like a worse outcome. A small, wet laugh escaped Melissa. That's fair. Eleanor stepped closer to the bed, and the room went very quiet. I'm sorry, Eleanor said. I know those two words don't come close to covering 28 years, but I don't know where else to start. I thought giving you up was the only kindness I had to offer you. I never once considered that you'd spend your whole life thinking it meant you weren't wanted. You were wanted, Melissa. I wanted you every single day. I just didn't think I had the right to want you out loud. Melissa's eyes filled, spilling over before she could stop them. I used to make up stories about you. When I was a kid, I decided you were a doctor, or a pilot, someone with an excuse important enough that giving me up made sense. It was easier than the alternative, that you just didn't think I was worth keeping. You were worth everything, Eleanor said, her own voice breaking now. I was 22, and terrified, and my parents made it sound like there was no other option, and I believed them because believing them was easier than fighting them. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. Melissa turned to Rachel. And you? 9 years, Rachel. 9 years of Sunday dinners and birthday parties and late nights closing deals together, and I let you think I was just an employee who got lucky. A friend. I told myself I was protecting you from the shock of it, but really, I think I was protecting myself. If I told you and you rejected me, I'd lose the company, the friendship, and the only family I'd ever chosen for myself, all at once. I couldn't survive losing you 3 times in one conversation. I'm not your employee's sister, Melissa. I'm your sister who happens to also run a company with you. Those aren't the same thing, and you don't get to decide which one matters more without asking me. I know that now. Melissa squeezed her hand weakly. I think some small, stupid part of me has known it the whole time and was too scared to test it. The monitor beeped steadily. Somewhere behind the curtain, a nurse's cart rolled past. And for a moment, the 3 of them, mother, daughter, and the daughter she'd never been allowed to raise, sat in a silence that, for the first time in 28 years, didn't feel like something hidden. It felt like something finally being carried together. But the story wasn't finished unraveling yet. Because 2 days later, when Melissa was discharged and the shock had settled into something closer to fragile peace, a courier arrived at Doyle and Vance Consulting with a certified letter that would upend everything Rachel thought she understood about why Melissa had really answered that job posting 9 years ago, and about who else had known the truth long before any of them. Melissa had turned 30 11 months ago. There's more, Rachel said quietly, because she'd read ahead while Melissa sat frozen. Your grandmother, Thomas's mother, she didn't just track down my mother back then. She kept tabs on you your whole life, Melissa. Quietly. She's the one who told the trust's lawyers where to find you when the time came. She passed away last spring. But before she did, she left something else. There was a second document in the envelope. A handwritten letter, addressed simply, for my granddaughter, whenever she is ready to read it. Melissa's hand shook as she unfolded it. I never met you, but I loved you from the moment I found out you existed. I watched you grow up from a distance I hated every single day. I saw your school photos through a private investigator I'm not proud of hiring, and I saw you graduate, and I saw you start a company with a woman I later learned, through a discovery that nearly stopped my heart, was your own half-sister, a coincidence so unlikely I have to believe some part of the universe was trying to give you back the family that was taken from you. I never had the courage to reach out while you were building your life, because I was afraid of disrupting something good. I regret that now more than almost anything. Please don't make my mistake. Don't let fear cost you people who are still alive to love you. Melissa was sobbing by the time she finished, and Rachel realized she was crying too, and even Katie, who had grown up as Melissa's sister without a drop of shared blood and loved her every bit as fiercely for it, had tears running freely down her face. She knew, Melissa said. She knew about you and me being sisters, and she never told either of us. Maybe she thought the truth would find its own way, Eleanor said. She had arrived 20 minutes earlier, still moving carefully from the hospital stay, and had been standing quietly in the doorway listening. Sometimes the people who love us most make the same mistake I did. They confuse silence with kindness. Melissa looked at Rachel. I have to tell you something else. The trust, it's substantial, Rachel. Enough that I don't need to work another day in my life if I don't want to. And I need you to know, the moment I found out about it 11 months ago, before you knew anything about our connection, I almost walked away from the company. I thought about it every single day. Taking the money, disappearing, starting over somewhere nobody knew me as anybody's secret. The only reason I didn't is that walking away from you felt like losing the only family I'd ever chosen to build with my own hands. Even before I knew you were my blood, you were already my family. I just needed you to know that part came first. Rachel reached across the table and took her sister's hand, no hesitation this time, no careful, cautious grip. Just two hands, holding on. Then don't walk away, Rachel said. Stay. Not because of blood, and not because of money. Stay because we built something worth staying for, and because I'd rather have a sister who lied to me for 9 years and finally told the truth than a stranger who never gave me the chance to forgive her. 6 months later, Doyle and Vance Consulting quietly became Vance and Doyle, Melissa's idea, over Rachel's laughing protest that alphabetical order mattered more than sentiment. Eleanor sat at the head of the table at every Sunday dinner now, 2 daughters on either side of her, a family rebuilt not from the lie that had almost destroyed it, but from the truth that, once spoken, none of them could imagine living without again.